the man who never reacts to disrespect.
Someone said something to you recently that you are still replaying. Maybe it was in a meeting, in front of people whose opinion of you matters. Maybe it was a comment from someone who has no real stake in your life at all, and yet here you are, hours or days later, still running the exchange, still composing the version of your response that would have put them in their place. That replay is not thinking. It is a small, ongoing surrender, and most men never notice they have handed over the keys. It shows up in smaller doses too, not just the big confrontations. The comment in the group chat you keep rereading, the tone in an email that probably meant nothing, that you have now interpreted 4 different ways before lunch. The look someone gave you in a meeting that you are still trying to decode hours later, running scenarios about what it meant and what you should have said back. None of it is dramatic. All of it is the same mechanism, working quietly all day in the background. The instinct to react to disrespect feels like strength. It feels like standing up for yourself, refusing to be walked over, the thing a man is supposed to do. What it actually is, in almost every case, is proof that the other person still has access to a part of you that should have been locked from the start. The reason a sharp reply feels satisfying and a controlled silence feels weak is exactly backwards from what is actually happening. The reply hands the other person evidence that their words landed. The silence is the only response that proves they didn't. By the time this is over, you will know exactly why the men who seem hardest to provoke are not suppressing anger. They have simply removed the mechanism that disrespect depends on to work at all, and how to start removing it yourself. Here is what makes this difficult for a man who takes his own standards seriously. He has spent years building the instinct to address problems directly instead of avoiding them. He confronts a missed deadline. He names a broken agreement. He does not let disrespect slide in his business or his household because he understands that unaddressed disrespect compounds. So when someone insults him directly, that same instinct fires, and reacting feels like the same discipline that has served him everywhere else. The distinction he is missing is not small. Addressing a problem and reacting to an insult are not the same category of action, even though they share the same adrenaline. One is a decision made from a position of control. The other is a reflex triggered by someone else's timing, on someone else's terms, engineered to get exactly the response it produced. Consider how differently he would evaluate this if it were happening to someone he was training rather than to himself. A junior employee gets baited into a public argument by a difficult client and loses composure. He does not tell that employee he was right to react. He tells him the client won, regardless of who had the better argument, because composure was the actual asset at stake, and it is the one that got spent. He would explain this clearly, patiently, as obvious. The same logic applied to his own reactions somehow never makes it through. What the provocation actually finds. Think about how obvious this is when you watch it happen to someone else. A man loses his composure in an argument, raises his voice, says something he cannot take back, and everyone in the room quietly notes what just happened. Not that he was right or wrong about the underlying issue, that he could be operated, that a specific sequence of words, said in a specific tone, could reliably take a grown man's composure away from him in under 10 seconds. That information does not disappear. It gets filed away, and it gets used again. This is precisely why disrespect so often escalates rather than resolving on its own. Each successful provocation is not a closed transaction. It is proof of concept, evidence gathered about exactly which words work and exactly how far the pressure needs to go. A man who reacts predictably has, without meaning to, published his own instruction manual. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Jung is pointing at something most men skip past too quickly when they hear it. The reason a particular insult lands with force is rarely about the insult's objective accuracy. It is about which specific nerve it happened to find. A comment about your competence only detonates if some part of you already doubts your competence. A comment about your marriage only detonates if some part of you is already uneasy about it. The provocation is not the cause of the reaction. It is closer to a diagnostic tool, pointing directly at wherever your own composure was already thinnest. This reframes the entire situation in a way most men never consider. The person trying to provoke you did not install the vulnerability. They only located it, the way anyone might stumble onto a weak floorboard by walking across a room. Getting angry at them for finding it is like getting angry at the floor for creaking. The actual work was always going to be reinforcing the floorboard, not punishing the person who happened to step on it. Consider two men who receive the identical insult, word for word, in front of the identical audience. One has spent years quietly doing the work on the exact area the insult targets, has nothing to prove there anymore, and barely registers the comment. The other has never looked at that area honestly and reacts instantly, disproportionately, in a way that confirms far more than the original insult ever could have on its own. The insult was identical, the floorboard was not. Notice, honestly, the last comment that actually got under your skin, and ask yourself which part of it was true enough to sting, rather than simply rude enough to annoy. There is a useful test buried in that question. A comment that is simply rude but untrue tends to fade within minutes, almost regardless of how aggressively it was delivered. A comment that is milder in tone but touches something accurate tends to linger for days. If you find yourself still replaying something a week later, the delivery was never the actual problem. Something in it matched a doubt you were already carrying alone. Here is the part that changes how you see all of this. Reacting to disrespect does not neutralize it, it completes it. An insult that gets no reaction is an incomplete transaction, a sentence spoken into a room that produced no visible effect, which is the single outcome most people attempting to provoke you are least prepared for. The reaction is not your defense, it is the other half of what they were trying to build, and you are the only one who can supply it. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it in every future exchange. The question stops being, how do I respond to this? And becomes something closer to, why would I finish this for them? Most men never ask that second question because the first one arrives so much faster and feels so much more urgent. But the gap between those two questions, however brief, is where every principle that follows actually lives. Everything from here forward is about widening that gap, not eliminating the sting of the provocation, which will always be there, but the automatic speed with which it used to convert into action. Principle 1. He does not confirm the story they're telling about him. Every insult is, underneath the specific words, an attempt to install a narrative that he is weak, incompetent, easily rattled, not worth taking seriously. The instinctive move is to argue against that narrative directly, to defend, explain, correct the record. But arguing against a story is still operating inside it. It treats the accusation as worth the energy of a rebuttal, which is itself a kind of confirmation that the accusation landed somewhere real. There is a specific reason this trap works as well as it does on capable men. Defending yourself feels active, feels like something, in a moment where doing nothing visible feels dangerously passive. But notice what actually happens to the narrative once you engage it directly. It gets airtime it would not otherwise have had. People who never would have heard the original comment now hear your response to it and form an opinion about a dispute that did not need their attention in the first place. Waste no time on what others think of you unless it serves them or you in some virtuous way. Marcus Aurelius is not telling you indifference is a virtue for its own sake. He is pointing out that most of the energy spent managing what others think produces no actual benefit to anyone, not even the person doing the managing. A man who has to correct every mischaracterization of himself has quietly made his own reputation dependent on the goodwill of people who were never entitled to define it in the first place. Watch how this plays out with a man who has actually internalized it. Someone mischaracterizes a decision he made publicly in a way that is not accurate. He does not chase the correction. He lets the mischaracterization sit there, uncontested, because he understands that contesting it would cost him more credibility than the mischaracterization itself ever could. The people whose judgment he actually respects were never going to be swayed by a stranger's version of events anyway. There is a version of this that shows up specifically in professional settings, where the instinct to correct the record feels almost mandatory. A competitor or a critic mischaracterizes his company, his methods, his numbers. Every instinct says, respond publicly, set the record straight, defend the name he built. Often the stronger move, the one that actually protects the name in the long run, is continuing to produce results that make the mischaracterization irrelevant on its own, without ever dignifying it with a direct reply. If you have ever spent real time composing a response to a comment that will be forgotten by everyone except you within a week, notice how much of that energy went toward protecting a story that nobody else was actually tracking as closely as you were. This does not mean he never corrects the record. It means he corrects it when accuracy actually matters to something real, a business relationship, a decision with consequences, and ignores it completely when the only thing at stake is his own discomfort at being misjudged by someone whose judgment carries no real weight. The filter he is actually applying, whether he could name it explicitly or not, is simple to state and hard to practice. Does this specific correction change an outcome that matters, or does it only change how one more person, whose opinion carries no real weight in his life, happens to feel about him for the next hour? Once that filter is running consistently, an enormous amount of what used to demand a response quietly stops qualifying for one. Principle 2. He treats the reaction as the actual attack, not the provocation. This is a harder distinction to hold on to in the moment than it sounds, because the provocation is what you can see, and the reaction is what you can feel, and feeling always seems more urgent than seeing. But the provocation alone rarely does lasting damage. A sentence, however cruel, evaporates the moment it is spoken. What actually does damage, to a reputation, a relationship, a negotiation, is almost always the reaction that followed it, not the provocation itself. To accept injury without a spirit of savage resentment, to show ourselves merciful toward those who wrong us, is characteristic of a benevolent and civilized way of life. Musonius Rufus is describing something that sounds, on first hearing, like passivity, and is actually closer to its opposite. Accepting an injury without resentment is not the same as pretending it did not happen. It means refusing to let the injury dictate what you do next, which requires more control, not less, than lashing back would. The angry response is the easy one. The measured one is the one that actually takes discipline. Think about the specific cost of getting this backwards. A man responds to disrespect with visible anger in front of people who work for him or depend on him. In that moment, he believes he is demonstrating strength. What the room actually absorbs is that his composure has a price, and that price was just discovered to be lower than anyone assumed. That information travels. It gets tested again, usually sooner than he expects. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it explains a pattern many men have noticed without ever naming it correctly. Once someone successfully provokes a strong reaction from you, they, or people who heard about it, tend to test the same button again later, sometimes without even realizing they are doing it. The reaction did not end the pattern. It taught the room where the switch was located and confirmed that it worked. Notice the specific physical sensation that shows up right before you react, the tightening, the heat, the urge to respond immediately, and treat that sensation itself as the actual signal to slow down rather than speed up. Most men have never trained themselves to notice that sensation as data rather than as a command. It arrives, and the very next thing that happens is action, with nothing in between to interrupt the sequence. The entire practice being described in this video lives in that interval, however small it currently is. And the good news is that interval grows every single time it gets used instead of skipped. The man who has internalized this principle does not feel nothing when disrespected. He feels the same initial spike anyone would. The difference is that he has trained the gap between the spike and the action to be wide enough that the spike is no longer the thing making the decision. This is worth distinguishing clearly from suppression because the two look similar from the outside and are almost opposites internally. Suppression is forcing the feeling down while it continues operating underneath, usually surfacing later in a worse form, at a worse time, against a worse target. What is being described here is different. The feeling is registered honestly, in full, and simply not handed the steering wheel. He knows exactly how angry he is. He has just stopped letting that number decide what happens next. Principle 3. He lets silence do work that words can't. Most men underestimate silence because it produces no visible effort, and effort has been trained into them as the marker of strength. Silence looks like nothing is happening. In reality, in the specific moment after a provocation, silence is doing something words cannot do, which is denying the other person any new material to work with. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we say. Zeno's arithmetic here is simple on the surface and considerably harder to practice than it sounds. Listening more than speaking is not a rule about manners. In a moment of confrontation, it is a tactical advantage. The man who stays quiet learns exactly how far the other person is willing to go when met with no resistance, which is information the man who reacts immediately never gets to collect, because he has already ended the exchange by supplying the reaction they were fishing for. Watch what actually happens when a man refuses to fill a silence that someone else is clearly expecting him to fill. The silence becomes the other person's problem to manage, not his. They either escalate, which exposes them further, or they back down, which was the entire outcome he wanted without having spent a single word achieving it. Either way, he has learned something true about the situation that reacting immediately would never have revealed. This is not the same as going silent out of avoidance, refusing to address a real issue because confrontation is uncomfortable. That is a different behavior wearing a similar costume. The silence being described here is a chosen withholding, deployed specifically in the moment someone is trying to provoke a reaction, not a permanent refusal to ever speak plainly when something actually needs to be said. There is a specific kind of confidence that develops in a man once he has practiced this enough times to trust it. He stops needing the last word because he has proven to himself, repeatedly, that the last word was never actually where the power was. The power was in being the only person in the room whose next move could not be predicted or provoked on command. Men who have built real authority in their work already understand a version of this in other contexts, even when they have not applied it to personal provocation yet. A skilled negotiator does not fill every silence across the table because he knows the other side will often talk themselves into a worse position simply to escape the discomfort of quiet. The same principle, aimed inward at your own reactions instead of outward at a counterpart, produces the same result. Whoever needs the exchange to end least is usually the one who ends up controlling how it ends. You have not lost anything real in your life to a man who stayed quiet and thought clearly. You have lost things, positions, relationships, respect you cannot easily rebuild, to the version of yourself that reacted first and thought about it afterward. Epictetus named the actual mechanism at the center of all 3 of these principles, that it is never the thing itself that disturbs a man, it is the judgment he attaches to it in the half-second before he decides how to respond. Marcus Aurelius removed the obligation to manage what people who do not matter think of you. Musonius Rufus reframed mercy under provocation as strength rather than weakness. And Zeno pointed out that the mouth you keep closed is doing more work in that moment than almost anything you could say with it open. Put together, these are not 4 separate techniques to memorize and deploy individually depending on the situation. They describe one continuous move seen from 4 angles. Notice the judgment before it becomes a reaction. Question whether the source of the provocation has actually earned your composure, and let the space where a response used to go automatically become a space you now choose to fill or leave empty on purpose. None of this requires you to become unreadable or cold to the people who actually matter to you. It requires something narrower and more specific, which is refusing to hand control of your composure to anyone who has not earned the right to hold it. The next time someone says something engineered to get a reaction out of you, you get to ask one plain question before you give them one. Is this actually worth what reacting will cost me? Or is this simply the easiest version of strength available in this exact second? None of this happens perfectly the first time you try it, and expecting otherwise is its own kind of setup for failure. The old pattern has years of practice behind it. The new one has whatever you give it starting today. The first few times you catch the sensation and choose the pause instead of the reply, it will feel unnatural, almost like restraint for its own sake rather than strength. That feeling fades with repetition, the same way every other trained response eventually stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like who you actually are. If you have made it this far, you already know exactly which recent moment this was about, and you already know what staying quiet in that same moment, the next time it happens, will actually cost you compared to what reacting always has. It will not feel like winning in the moment. That is worth saying plainly, because expecting it to feel like victory is where most men abandon the practice before it has a chance to prove itself. It will feel like nothing happened, like you let something go unanswered, like the other person got away with something. What actually happened is that you kept something they were trying to take, and the fact that it does not feel dramatic is exactly why it works.